The forest was still, eerily still, the kind of quiet that presses in on your chest, making each breath feel heavier than the last. The air was cold, the sharp scent of pine and earth clinging to the dampness of the trees. A faint mist clung to the ground, curling through the underbrush like something alive, whispering secrets only the trees seemed to understand. Among the towering pines, a lone figure moved slowly, her steps faltering as if the earth itself didn't want her to keep walking. Adeline. She looked like she had stepped out of a different time, her frail body swathed in a tattered lavender dress, once elegant but now stained with dirt and worn down by the harshness of the forest. Her white hair, tangled with twigs, caught the faint light, creating a haunting halo around her face. She wasn't lost, at least not in the way you might think. Adeline knew exactly where she was. She was lost in herself. Her memory had been slipping for years, and now, out here, surrounded by trees that didn't care about her name, she was more lost than ever. Every step forward felt like it took her further from the person she once was. Strong, proud, full of life. Now she was a shell, wandering in search of something she couldn't remember. Her chest heaved with the effort of each breath, and her hands clutched a small leather handbag, as if it were the last tether to the world she had once known. But her eyes, those eyes, held nothing but confusion. A blankness that betrayed the storm of thoughts rushing through her mind, she whispered to herself, but no words came out clearly. Where am I? How did I get here? She paused, looking around, unsure of which way to go. But the forest, the trees, the air, they didn't care. No one was there to guide her. No one was there to hold her hand and say everything would be okay. She had been abandoned, left behind by the very people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. Her children, once her pride, had chosen their careers, their lives, their futures, leaving her behind like a forgotten relic. And now, here she was, wandering deeper into the woods, as though the forest itself might swallow her whole and keep her out of sight, out of mind. Far from the distant hum of town life, Hope walked the familiar forest path, basket in hand, collecting firewood. She had learned to carry her responsibilities with quiet grace. Her small feet shuffled over the gravel, her mind full of thoughts too old for a girl her age. Hope had been abandoned once, too. Her parents had promised to come back for her, but years had passed, and the letters had stopped. The cold mountain wind tugged at her braids as she walked, a knot of sadness settling in her chest. She didn't know why, but today felt different. As if something was about to happen, something that would change everything. She walked further down the path, unaware that fate was about to intervene in a way she never could have imagined. Hook. What happens when an elderly woman, cast aside by her own family, stumbles into a forest, lost, abandoned, and alone? The answer will shock you. Keep watching. Who is this elderly woman? Why is she lost in the forest? And how is Hope connected to her? The answers are coming, but you won't see this twist coming. Adeline had once been the heart of a thriving family. She had lived in a beautiful house on a quiet street, with an immaculate garden that bloomed with colors as vibrant as the love that had once filled the air. The walls had been lined with laughter and warmth, a place where her children, Edward, Patricia, and Stephen, ran through the halls as children, their voices filling every corner of the home. She remembered those days with a kind of clarity that felt like it had happened just yesterday, despite the fog that now clouded her mind. In her youth, Adeline had been proud of her family. Her husband, Arthur, a hard-working man, had built their wealth from the ground up. The house, the garden, the children, all were the rewards of years of sacrifice, love, and hard work. And she had raised them to be strong, independent, and successful, believing that the values she instilled in them would one day return to her in the form of loyalty and care. But as time wore on, those very values seemed to fade from her children's hearts. As they grew older, their visits became fewer, their phone calls shorter, and their letters even rarer. The once warm and loving family became a mere facade of what it had been. She remembered the last time they had all gathered at the house, long before the memory loss began to cloud her days. They had celebrated Christmas, the house full of laughter, the fire crackling in the hearth. Adeline had watched them all, her children, their spouses, her grandchildren, gathered together, surrounded by gifts, food, and the joy of the season. But that was years ago. Now the house felt too quiet. The voices of her children no longer filled the space. The laughter had long since faded, replaced by the creak of floorboards and the sound of her own footsteps echoing in an empty house. It all changed when the forgetfulness started. At first it was small things. Forgetting where she placed her keys, misplacing her glasses. It was easy to laugh it off, to chalk it up to aging. But soon, it became clear that something deeper was happening. She started forgetting names, faces, important memories. The doctor called it dementia. The truth hit her like a tidal wave, but it wasn't the disease that hurt the most. It was the way her children reacted. The first time she realized they were treating her differently was when Edward visited, his face tight with frustration as he patiently explained how she had forgotten to take her medication. She had tried to apologize, but the look in his eyes made it clear he didn't see her as his mother anymore. She was a problem, a burden to be dealt with. A few weeks later, they took her to the nursing home. The decision was made in hushed voices, behind closed doors, far from her ears. She didn't understand it at first, didn't know why they were so eager to send her away, but she soon realized her children didn't want to care for her. They had their lives, their careers, their reputations to protect. And she had become a complication, a liability. Adeline had pleaded, asked to stay in her home, but the decision had already been made. The house, her sanctuary, was no longer a place for her to live out her days. Her children didn't even visit her that first week. The only visitor she had was the doctor, whose face held a look of pity she couldn't quite understand. She remembered the last letter she received from them. It had been months after they had placed her in the nursing home, a formality. The words on the page seemed distant, cold, an excuse more than anything else. They told her they were too busy to visit. They told her they loved her and hoped she was well. But the truth was, in the space between the lines, the distance that had grown between them, a chasm she would never be able to cross again. Adeline had once been the heart of a thriving family. Now her children couldn't even be bothered to visit. The last letter she received from them was a mere excuse. In the nursing home, the silence was oppressive. The other residents seemed to fade into the background, their faces empty, their lives reduced to routine. Meals, medication, bedtimes, everything was structured, but nothing felt like home. It was a place for people who had no one left to care for them, a place where love had no place. Adeline's children had made it clear that they weren't coming back. Their visits became rare and the calls even less frequent. When Edward did come, he barely looked at her. Patricia came only once, leaving a box of chocolates at her bedside, as if that could replace years of care and love. Stephen had come with his family, but stayed no longer than an hour. Adeline sat in her small room, staring out the window, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. How had she gone from being the matriarch of a thriving family to an invisible woman? The memories of her children, once filled with love, now felt like echoes from another lifetime. And when they left her there, they left not just her home, but her heart behind. What caused this distance? Why had her children abandoned her so easily? And could there be a way back from this hurt, if anyone would even try? Hope Miller had known abandonment her entire life. It wasn't just the quiet town of Blackwood, Creek, where she felt alone. It was a loneliness that had followed, From the day her parents left. She was just 3 years old when they told her they would be back soon. Their promises were sweet, their words laced with warmth and affection. Her father, a man of business, spoke of big plans in the city, opportunities they couldn't miss. Her mother promised to bring back presents, toys, things she couldn't even name. But no matter how often she stood by the window, looking for the familiar figures of her parents walking back toward her, they never returned. For the first few years, there were letters. At least that's what her grandparents told her. They arrived monthly, sometimes bi-monthly. Beautifully written letters from her mother and father that spoke of how much they missed her, how soon they would come for her. But as the years passed, those letters came less frequently. They started to be shorter. By the time Hope was 7, the letters stopped altogether, replaced by Christmas cards with generic messages that only deepened the ache in her chest. Her grandfather, Walter, would sit with her in the evenings, telling her about the nature around them. "Some things in life don't make sense, Hope," he'd say, "but that doesn't mean they aren't real." It was a lesson she was too young to fully understand. But she learned to believe him, and she learned to trust that her grandparents would always care for her. They had to. No one else was around, too. Matilda, her grandmother, was a constant presence, an anchor in Hope's life. She would wake up early, even before the first light of day, and prepare the small cabin with love and care. The house always smelled of fresh bread and herbal tea, and it was Matilda's touch that made the log walls feel like home. Hope admired her grandmother. She had a grace about her that made everything feel warm, even when things were hard. Matilda taught her how to sew, how to mend, how to bake the same bread that seemed to make the cold mountain nights more bearable. There was no one else in the world like Matilda, at least not in Hope's small world. But even with all the love her grandparents gave her, there was always something missing. Something no amount of care could replace. Hope longed for the warmth that only a mother could give. There were days when the absence of that maternal love gnawed at her, like an open wound she didn't know how to tend. She saw the way other girls in town interacted with their mothers, how they ran into their arms after school, how they sat together at the dinner table and shared stories. Hope had no one to share her day with, no one who would ask her how she was feeling or hug her just because. Her friends at school never seemed to understand, and whenever they talked about their families, the ache inside her chest only grew. It was on those days that she would retreat into the woods, away from the questions, away from the pitying glances. It was during one of those quiet walks, when she was 8 years old, that she first stumbled upon Adeline. Hope had wandered deeper into the forest than usual, collecting firewood for the evening. The path was familiar. She knew the woods as well as she knew her own heart. It was a peaceful solitude she had grown accustomed to. The soft rustle of leaves above her head, the scent of pine filling her lungs. There were times when it felt as though the forest was her only friend, the trees offering their quiet company and the birds their gentle song. But that morning, something felt different. The air was thicker, as if it was waiting for something, and as she gathered a bundle of branches, Hope heard it. A faint, trembling voice, barely audible at first. She froze, straining to hear. It was a voice, old and fragile, like the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. But it wasn't the wind. Someone was speaking. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Her grandfather had always told her to be cautious in the woods, to never stray too far from the path. But something in that voice, something about the desperation in it, compelled her to move forward. She followed the sound, her small feet pushing through the thick underbrush. The voice grew louder, more distinct, and Hope's heart began to race. There was something about it that made her think of herself, of the loneliness she carried every day. She finally broke through a dense cluster of trees, and there, Sitting against the base of a giant oak was a woman, an elderly woman, her face pale and drawn with confusion. Her once beautiful lavender dress was torn and stained, her hair wild and tangled with twigs. She stared into the distance, speaking softly to herself in broken sentences. Hope stood frozen, her eyes locked on the woman. There was something about her, something that reminded Hope of the stories her grandmother told her about how life could change in an instant, how everything could be lost in the blink of an eye. The woman's eyes met Hope's, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to pause. The woman's expression shifted from confusion to something else, recognition, perhaps, or just the simple, quiet relief that someone had found her. Hope's heart went out to her in that instant, and without thinking, she stepped forward. "Are you okay?" Hope asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The woman blinked slowly, as if trying to focus on the girl before her. Who are you?" she murmured, her voice trembling. "My name's Hope," the girl said, sitting down beside her. "I can help you." The woman smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Hope couldn't ignore. "I've been waiting for someone. I've been lost for so long." Hope didn't know what to say. She didn't know this woman, but in that moment she understood the depth of her loneliness. She could see it in the woman's eyes, the same loneliness that had haunted her for years. Hope was no stranger to abandonment, but when she met the elderly woman in the forest, she discovered a bond that would change both their lives forever. As they sat together, Hope couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment she had been waiting for. She had always felt like she was missing a part of herself, something her grandparents couldn't give her. But now, in this quiet forest, she had found something unexpected. Someone who, in many ways, was just as lost as she was. Hope didn't know it yet, but this encounter was about to lead her down a path that would change both her and Adeline's lives forever. They both had scars, emotional wounds that had never truly healed. And somehow, in the heart of the forest, they had found each other. How will the encounter between Hope and Adeline change both their lives? What secrets will Adeline reveal about her past? How will Hope help her in ways she never expected? Hope had been warned. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head as she ventured deeper into the forest. "Be careful in the woods, Hope. Don't trust strangers. And never stray too far from the path." But as the wind whispered through the trees, and the soft voice of the elderly woman reached her ears, Hope felt a different kind of pull, a need to help that went beyond fear. Her feet moved instinctively, despite the sense of caution that her grandfather's words had instilled in her. The forest was vast, but it no longer felt like an intimidating place. It had always been a part of her life, a place where she had sought solace in her loneliness, where she could think without the weight of her unanswered questions. Today, though, it was a place of possibility. When she finally saw the woman, sitting alone beneath the sprawling oak, something in her chest tightened. The woman's face was a tapestry of age and confusion, her lavender dress torn and stained. Her eyes were distant, as though she was looking through Hope, not at her. There was a vulnerability in the woman's posture, the way she clutched her leather handbag like it was the last thread connecting her to her past. It wasn't just loneliness that radiated from her. It was something darker, a deeper isolation that Hope couldn't quite understand. Adeline didn't move at first. Her gaze didn't settle on Hope. Instead, it drifted over her, as if she were seeing a ghost. Her hands trembled slightly, and she muttered to herself, I'm not lost, I know. I just need to find my way." Hope felt her heart ache at the confusion in the woman's voice. There was something so familiar in her sadness, a sadness Hope herself carried deep inside her. Maybe it was because she too felt lost. In a way she always had. But Hope wasn't just going to leave this woman here, lost in a world of confusion. She stepped closer, gently. Hi, I'm Hope. Are you okay? Her voice was soft, filled with a sincerity that only a child could possess, a true desire to help. No strings attached, Adeline blinked slowly, her foggy mind struggling to connect the voice to the body standing before her. But then, as though something inside her began to clear, her eyes locked onto Hope's with sudden recognition. "Hope?" Adeline whispered, her voice trembling. I remember someone named Hope, but why are you here? Why are you—" Hope knelt beside her, her small frame seeming to offer what strength she had, hoping it would be enough. "You're safe now," she said, her words filling the space between them. "I heard you. You sounded scared. I can help you. I won't leave you here." Adeline's eyes searched Hope's face, as if trying to find something familiar there, but her mind was in pieces, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't put the pieces together. Hope's kindness, however, seemed to soothe her in a way nothing else had in a long time. "I don't remember," Adeline began, her voice trailing off, her brow furrowed, and a sad look passed across her face. "I don't remember much of anything anymore. Not like I used to. I used to know who I was, where I belonged. But now—" Her voice cracked, and she paused, her chest rising and falling with a shallow breath. She looked down at her hands, twisting the worn leather of her bag in her grip. Hope's heart clenched. She had seen her grandmother Matilda get older, her hands shaking when she worked, her mind slowing with the years. But nothing had prepared Hope for this, seeing someone who was so far gone, yet still so present in her pain. It made the emptiness Hope often felt seem almost insignificant in comparison. "It's okay," Hope said softly, placing a hand on Adeline's trembling one. "You don't have to remember everything right now. I'm here. I'll stay with you." Adeline's eyes softened at the gesture, the tremors in her hands slowly quieting beneath Hope's touch. There was something about this little girl, something in the quiet assurance in her eyes, that felt like a lifeline. It wasn't pity or sympathy that Hope gave her. It was a raw, untainted kind of compassion that spoke to a deep understanding. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Hope added, her voice gentle. "I can help you. I won't let you be alone." Adeline's eyes filled with tears, the weight of years of neglect and abandonment washing over her in that one moment. She had felt alone for so long, trapped in a world where her children no longer saw her as a person, but as a problem to be solved. It wasn't just the forgetfulness that hurt. It was the fact that no one cared enough to stick around, to make sure she was okay. But now, here was this little girl, offering something no one else had. Understanding and love, with no strings attached. I'm not used to being needed," Adeline said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much time just fading away. I thought I was invisible." Hope's heart swelled with a tenderness she had never felt before. "You're not invisible to me. You're not a burden either." Hope's words were a promise. She didn't know what it was like to be abandoned by her children, but she knew what it was like to be forgotten, to feel as if you didn't matter. But in that moment, in the presence of this lost woman, Hope knew that her loneliness could fade too. They could find each other, help each other, in ways no one else could. Adeline's eyes looked into Hope's with something she hadn't seen in a long time, a glimmer of hope. "I don't want to be a burden to anyone," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You're not," Hope replied firmly. You're just someone who needs a little help, and I want to help you." They sat there for a few moments in silence, the forest around them still and watching. Hope could feel the weight of Adeline's grief, the years of neglect she had endured, but she also sensed something else, a quiet strength that was slowly beginning to surface. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, Adeline had someone who saw her as more than just an elderly woman fading into the background. She had someone who saw her as a person, someone who mattered. In a moment of pure connection, Hope offered Adeline more than her children ever had: love and understanding. But this moment was just the beginning. Hope slowly stood, offering her hand to Adeline. "Come on," she said softly. "I'll help you back to town. My grandfather's cabin isn't far. You'll be safe there." Adeline looked at her hand for a moment, then back into Hope's face, as though trying to decide whether to trust this girl completely. Hope's sincerity was undeniable. There was no fear in her eyes, no ulterior motive. It was simply kindness. Adeline took her hand, allowing Hope to guide her back toward the town. But in her heart, something was beginning to shift, something that had been broken for so long. She wasn't alone anymore. Will Hope be able to keep Adeline safe from the dangers of the forest, and how will their bond grow from here? How will Hope navigate the challenges of helping Adeline? And what secrets will Adeline reveal about her past? As Hope guided Adeline through the forest, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet was the only sound between them. The air felt heavy, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The silence was peaceful, but the weight of Adeline's emotions hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Hope couldn't help but notice the way the old woman's hands trembled as she gripped her leather handbag, still clutched tightly to her chest. It was as though the bag contained everything Adeline had left: her memories, her dignity, her soul. When they reached the cabin, the warm glow of the fire inside greeted them, but the warmth couldn't quite reach Adeline's heart. She sat down in the rocking chair Matilda had placed by the window, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. Hope didn't speak, letting the quiet of the evening settle around them. The evening passed slowly, with only the crackling of the fire and the occasional chirp of a cricket breaking the stillness. Adeline stared into the flames, her mind far away, but the silence was comforting, not forced. Hope could sense that Adeline was gathering the strength to speak, to let the broken pieces of her past resurface, but she didn't push her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Adeline spoke. Her voice was quiet, soft, as though the weight of her words might break her if she said them too loudly. "I used to have a family," she began, her gaze lost in the fire. "A big one. A beautiful one. My husband Arthur, he was the love of my life." Her voice cracked slightly as she said his name, but she didn't stop. "We were happy, or at least I thought we were. I raised 3 children. Edward, Patricia, Stephen. They were my world, my everything." Hope watched her, her heart aching as she saw the sadness that passed over Adeline's face. This wasn't just the story of an old woman. This was the story of a mother who had loved and lost, who had given everything only to be left behind. Arthur worked hard. He was a successful man. We had a beautiful house, a life that many would envy. I thought we had everything. Adeline continued, her voice quieter now. But as the years went by, things changed. Arthur died, cancer, a fast one. I think I knew he was going to go before he did. He had that look, you know, the one where you can tell someone's slipping away, but you don't want to believe it. When he passed, it felt like the ground fell out from under me. Hope felt a pang of sympathy for Adeline, though she didn't interrupt. She knew that the hardest part of telling a story like this wasn't just reliving it, it was revealing the truth. And Hope could see that Adeline was inching closer to it. I was okay for a while," Adeline whispered, her hands tightening around the leather handbag in her lap. "But after Arthur was gone, things started to change with my children. They weren't around as much, and when they were different. They seemed impatient with me. I didn't know why at first, but then I started forgetting things, small things, where I put the keys or the name of a neighbor. I thought it was just old age. I didn't think it meant anything." Her voice faltered, and she paused, taking a breath. Hope didn't move, didn't speak. She simply listened. Adeline's pain was becoming clearer with every word she spoke. The first time I noticed it, I had forgotten where I'd placed something. Just a silly little thing, but it bothered them. They acted like I was a problem, like I wasn't the mother they used to know. Adeline shook her head, as if trying to shake the memory out. At first it was subtle, but then it grew. I couldn't remember things, and that's when they started making excuses. "Oh, Mom, don't worry about it." She let out a small, bitter laugh. I started to become a burden, I think, and I hated it. I hated the look in their eyes when they would talk about me like I wasn't there. Hope felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't have to imagine how it must have felt to have her own children treat her like that. She had seen it too often in the town, the elderly being treated with indifference, as if their years of wisdom and love were somehow less valuable than the next big thing. But Hope had never imagined it could happen to someone like Adeline, who had once been at the center of her family's world. But it didn't stop there, Adeline continued, her voice tinged with sorrow. When I began forgetting more, they started talking about sending me away. They said it was for my own good, that I needed professional care. At first I didn't understand. I thought they loved me. I didn't think they would ever want to put me in a place like that, but they did. Adeline's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Hope saw her as something more than just an old woman lost in the forest. She saw a woman who had loved fiercely, who had given all she had, and in the end, had been abandoned by the very people she had devoted her life to. Hope couldn't even begin to imagine the pain of that betrayal, the sting of seeing her children walk away when she needed them most. "They didn't even ask me what I wanted," Adeline whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "They made the decision for me. They told me I was going to a care facility. But when I got there, it wasn't what they promised. It wasn't home. It was cold, sterile. I felt like I was just another old woman to be forgotten." Hope's heart broke for her. There was nothing more cruel than being forgotten, being left behind by the very people who should have fought for you. "They didn't visit," Adeline continued, her voice trembling. "Not at first. Not often, and then, when they did come, it was like I was just a problem they had to check off. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a nuisance, something to be hidden away." Hope sat beside her, not speaking, just offering her quiet presence. She didn't know what to say. The words Adeline needed to hear were so much bigger than any comfort she could give. But in that moment, Hope felt something powerful between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to be abandoned. She too knew what it was like to wait for someone who never came, to feel like no one was looking for her. Adeline's voice grew quieter as she finished. "I escaped. That's why I was in the forest. I just couldn't stay there any longer, alone in that place. I thought I would die there. I thought I had already died and no one cared." Hope reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "You're not alone anymore, Adeline. You're here, and you're with me." Adeline looked into Hope's eyes, and for the first time since they'd met, there was a glimmer of something other than sadness, a quiet flicker of hope. You've been kinder to me than anyone else, even my children." Her voice trailed off and she swallowed hard. "Thank you, Hope, for not leaving me." Hope gave her a soft smile, holding her hand gently. "I'll never leave you. Not ever." Adeline's mind had been clouded by memory loss, but her heart still remembered the pain of being abandoned by those she loved most. Would anyone come to save her? Or had she been left to die? Hope sat beside Adeline as the fire burned low, their silence filled with unspoken understanding. She knew that this was only the beginning of what they would face together. But one thing was certain. Hope would help Adeline find what her family never had the courage to give her: love, respect, and a place to call home. How will Hope help Adeline navigate her painful past? And will the truth of her family's betrayal finally surface? What consequences will the family face for abandoning Adeline? The peace that had settled over the small cabin in Blackwood Creek, where Hope and Adeline had begun to build a bond stronger than anything either of them had known, was suddenly shattered by a cold breeze, a breeze that carried with it the distant hum of something dangerous. Adeline sat by the window one morning, her gaze distant but focused on something Hope couldn't see. It was the same look she had when the past crept up on her, when her memories bled into the present, and she began to slip away again. But today, it wasn't the memories that worried Hope. It was the quiet unease in Adeline's eyes, the same unease that had been growing in the pit of Hope's stomach for the last few days. "I can feel them," Adeline whispered, almost as though speaking to herself. "I can feel them coming." Hope, who had been in the kitchen helping Matilda prepare breakfast, froze. A chill ran down her spine, as though the words Adeline had spoken had put a name to the fear that had been clawing at her from the inside. Hope wasn't just scared of losing her grandmother of the heart. She was scared of what might happen when the family that had abandoned her arrived. Over the last few days, the tension had grown. Hope had noticed how the people in town had started to act strangely when they saw Adeline and her walking together. The looks, the whispers, the occasional glance at their backs, it wasn't subtle. But Hope couldn't understand why, until one day, when the front door creaked open and Matilda had answered it, her expression darkening almost immediately. "They're here," Matilda had said, her voice tight with unease. She didn't need to say more. The situation was about to escalate. Adeline's children, the ones who had cast her aside as though she were a nuisance, were not going to let her go without a fight. And they weren't going to let a little thing like love or kindness stop them. The small, humble town that had embraced Adeline was about to be thrust into a legal battle, one that would pit family against family and test the bonds that had formed in the wake of years of neglect. Hope didn't need to ask what had happened. The look on Matilda's face said it all. Adeline's eldest son, Edward, had hired private investigators. He had been making phone calls to local officials, demanding to know the whereabouts of his mother. Hope could feel the pressure mounting every time the name Edward Vance was spoken in hushed tones around town. He wasn't coming to find his mother. He was coming to find a liability, a woman who had become nothing more than a tarnish on his perfect family reputation. The stakes were higher than Hope had anticipated. If Adeline's children found out where she was, they would take her back, no matter the cost. And that cost was much higher than Adeline's comfort or safety. It was about protecting their image, about keeping their secret of abandonment buried deep enough that no one would dare question their actions. It started with a knock on the door. Hope had just come from the garden, her hands dirty from digging in the soil, when she heard the firm rap on the door. She opened it, expecting Matilda or Walter, but instead, standing before her was a man dressed in a sharp suit, a briefcase held tightly in his hand. His eyes, cold and calculating, studied her without a hint of warmth. Behind him 2 men lingered, neither smiling, neither friendly. "You must be Hope Miller," the man said, his voice authoritative, as though he were used to being obeyed. "We're looking for an elderly woman named Adeline Vance. You wouldn't happen to know where she is, would you?" Hope's heart dropped into her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know who you're talking about," she lied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The man didn't move, didn't blink. "We know she's here, Miss Miller. We've already contacted the local authorities. You can either cooperate with us or face legal consequences." The words hung in the air, heavy with the threat of something irreversible. Hope's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the sound of Adeline's shaky footsteps approaching from inside the house, and she knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning. The tension was palpable as the man spoke again, this time more forcefully. Adeline Vance is a liability. She has mental health issues and has been reported as missing from a professional care facility. We are legally entitled to take her back. I strongly suggest you let us in. Hope felt a surge of anger. Her fists clenched at her sides. She was not going to let these people who had discarded Adeline without a second thought, come in and drag her back to the hell they'd put her through. I won't let you take her, Hope said, her voice trembling but resolute. She's not your property. She has the right to live wherever she wants, with whoever she wants. The man's gaze hardened. You're making a mistake, young lady. This is not about what you want. This is about what's legally required. You don't want to be on the wrong side of the law, do you? Hope's mind raced. They had no legal right to keep Adeline against her will. But Edward had money. He had influence. And he had already started to make moves that could tear apart the peaceful life they had started to build. That night, Hope couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts running wild. Would Edward and his team return? What would they do when they found Adeline? Would they drag her back to the facility she had escaped from? Would she be sent to a place where she would fade away again, alone and uncared for? Adeline, too, was restless. She had heard the conversation at the door, and though she tried to mask her fear, Hope could see the tremble in her hands, the shadow in her eyes. They're coming for me, Adeline said quietly, her voice so soft it was almost drowned out by the wind outside. I can feel it. They'll take me back. They'll never stop. I thought I was free. Hope sat up, crossing the small room to sit next to her. You're not going back. Not while I'm here. I promise you that. Adeline's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm scared, Hope. What if they take me back? What if I can't fight them anymore? Hope held her hand tightly. You don't have to fight alone. You have me, and you have Matilda and Walter. We'll protect you no matter what. But even as she spoke the words, Hope wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Edward and his family weren't going to give up. They had money, power, and influence, and they would use all of it to get what they wanted. The next day, the situation escalated. Edward sent a letter, threatening to sue anyone who aided Adeline's abduction, accusing Hope's family of unlawful detention. The words were chilling, but they weren't empty. Hope could see the writing on the wall. If Adeline's family couldn't control her through guilt, they would try to use the law to break them. Hope's heart pounded as she watched Matilda read the letter aloud, her face pale with concern. But Hope didn't back down. She couldn't. We'll stand together, Matilda said firmly, meeting Hope's gaze. This is our family now, and no one is taking her away. Adeline's children were coming, but they weren't searching for a mother. They were searching for a liability. Would Hope be able to protect the grandmother she had come to love? Will Hope be able to protect Adeline from the legal pressure of her children? What will happen when Adeline's children find her? Will the bonds they've created hold, or will they shatter under the weight of legal threats and family betrayal? The next chapter holds the answers. The morning was unnaturally still. The birds, usually active at dawn, seemed to have retreated to some hidden corner of the forest. The house in Blackwood Creek, which had become a sanctuary for Adeline and Hope, felt almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. Hope stood near the window, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The distant rumble of vehicles grew louder by the second, each approaching sound like a countdown to a moment she knew would change everything. Adeline was in her favorite chair by the fire, her hands clasped tightly, and her eyes focused on nothing in particular. The familiar warmth of the cabin seemed to surround them, but the tension between them was palpable, suffocating the air. It's happening, isn't it? Adeline's voice broke the silence, her tone heavy with resignation. Hope turned toward her, a knot tightening in her stomach. "They're coming," she said, her voice steady, but her heart racing. Adeline looked down at her hands, the faded memories of her past swirling in her mind, the love she had once given, now nothing more than a painful echo. "I never thought it would come to this, that I would have to choose between my children and my peace." Hope walked over to her, sitting at her side and placing a hand gently on hers. "You don't have to choose. You've already chosen. You have us now. We're your family, Adeline. Not them. They've had their chance." Adeline nodded, tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. "I just wanted to be loved. I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to feel like I mattered. But they never saw me like that." She paused, her gaze distant. "They saw me as someone to be hidden away." Hope squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of anger on Adeline's behalf. This wasn't just about legalities. It was about a mother who had been cast aside like an old coat. The knock came at the door shortly after, a sharp, definitive rap. Hope's heart skipped a beat. It was them. Matilda, who had been preparing tea in the kitchen, came to the door first. She opened it with a composed expression, though Hope could see the tension in her grandmother's jaw. Standing outside were Edward, Patricia, and Stephen, Adeline's 3 children. But today, they looked different. The smugness of their past visits was replaced by something darker, a sense of entitlement. Edward, always the authoritative one, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've come for our mother," he declared, his tone cold, as though nothing had changed. "It's time for her to come home." Hope couldn't keep quiet any longer. She stepped forward, her voice loud and unwavering. "No, she's not coming with you." The words hung in the air like an electric charge. Edward's eyes narrowed, and he shot a quick, almost imperceptible glance at Patricia, who stood with arms crossed, looking smug. Stephen, the youngest, looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. "We have every right to take her back," Edward snapped, his voice icy. "She's our mother, and you," he said, turning to Hope, "are just a little girl playing at family. You have no idea what's best for her." Hope stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides. "You don't get to decide what's best for her. You already made that decision years ago, when you sent her away like she was some inconvenience. You're not a family. You're just people trying to cover up your guilt." Adeline, who had been silent until now, slowly stood up from her chair. Hope watched her, her heart swelling with pride as Adeline walked to the center of the room. There was a newfound strength in her gait, a conviction that hadn't been there before. "I've heard enough," Adeline said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I don't need to listen to this anymore. You can't control me anymore." Edward's expression darkened, his hands clenching into fists. "You don't know what you're saying. You're confused, Mother. This isn't you speaking. It's the disease. You need help. Real help." Adeline shook her head, her eyes locking onto each of her children in turn. "You don't get to tell me what I need anymore. You never really asked me. You never really cared. You took me to that place," she gestured vaguely, "and you left me there to rot. You never visited, never asked how I was doing. You just abandoned me." The words were raw, the weight of years of pain, of emotional neglect, finally spilling out. For a brief moment, the room was still. Even Edward's usual composure faltered. "You are not the family I want," Adeline continued, her voice breaking but her resolve clear. "I have a family now. I have Hope. I have Matilda and Walter. They have shown me what love really is. They've shown me what it means to be seen. And I won't go back to a place where I'm treated like I'm invisible." Hope's chest swelled with emotion. In that moment, she saw Adeline as a warrior, not a fragile old woman, but someone who had finally found the strength to fight for herself, to stand up for the love she had found in a family that didn't owe her anything, but had chosen her all the same. Edward's face twisted with anger, his mask of control slipping. "This is a mistake, Mother. You don't understand. We're trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Adeline scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You're trying to protect your reputation. You don't care about me. You never have." The tension in the room was unbearable. Patricia, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice sharp and accusatory. "This is ridiculous. You don't even know these people. You think they love you? They're taking advantage of you, making you think they care just to keep you around. They're not your family." Hope stepped forward, her eyes burning with righteous fury. "Maybe they're not my family by blood, but they're the ones who care for me. They've shown me love when I didn't even know what it was. And you," Hope turned to face Adeline's children, "you are the ones who abandoned her. You are the ones who left her behind like she was some burden. You don't get to take her back now, not after everything you've done." Edward's face was flushed with rage. "This is not your decision to make. You have no right to interfere with our family." Hope took a deep breath, standing tall. "Then I'll make it my decision. I'll protect Adeline with everything I have. You're not taking her away from us." The room was thick with the threat of violence. Whether legal or physical, the danger was real. Adeline's children could easily drag her back into their world of shame and neglect, using every bit of power they had. But Hope wasn't backing down. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Just as the atmosphere reached its breaking point, a soft knock on the door interrupted the growing chaos. Matilda had been outside, listening in silence, and now she stepped into the room with a calmness that cut through the tension. "We've contacted the authorities," Matilda said, her voice steady. "If you want to make this a legal matter, we will. But we will stand firm. You will not take her without a fight." Edward sneered. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "You've made all the mistakes already," Matilda replied coolly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Now it's time to face the consequences." In that moment, Adeline made her choice. She had been abandoned by her blood, but she had found a family who truly cared. Her children wouldn't take her away again. How will the authorities handle the legal battle? Will they side with the family of blood, or will they honor Adeline's wishes? The showdown isn't over yet, and the final decision may not come down to the law. It may come down to the truth of who really loves her. The tension in the room had reached its peak. The confrontation between Hope, Adeline, and her children had reached a fever pitch. Edward and Patricia stood there, unmoved by anything other than their desire to control the situation, while Adeline and Hope fought with everything they had to keep Adeline's newfound peace intact. But in the midst of all the fury, there was a shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a moment of triumph, but something quieter, more subtle. The room seemed to hold its breath. Stephen, Adeline's youngest son, who had been a silent observer throughout the storm, took a hesitant step forward. His expression, usually one of detached indifference, was now marred with something more raw, a guilt that ran deep. He had been the least involved in the decisions that had led to his mother's abandonment, but now, as he stood in the presence of his mother's new family, he felt a weight on his chest that had been missing for years. Hope. Stephen's voice cracked, and for the first time since entering the room, he looked directly at her. "Can we talk?" The words hung in the air, and Hope felt her heart thump painfully in her chest. What was he doing? Why was he reaching out now? Hope hesitated, but then nodded. She knew that what happened next could change everything, but she was ready. She was ready to hear whatever Stephen needed to say. "Please," Stephen continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've been wrong. All of us have been wrong." He swallowed hard, the emotion in his eyes almost unbearable. "I can't undo what I've done. I can't fix what's been broken, but I need to say it. We abandoned her." Hope looked at him, her anger still simmering. She'd heard the words before. She had seen the hollow apologies that people like Stephen often gave. Words that were supposed to mean something, but carried no weight. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something desperate. Adeline, who had been quietly observing her son, took a deep breath. "I don't need apologies," she said softly, her voice trembling. "What I need is to be loved. What I needed from you all these years was to not be forgotten, to not be treated like a burden." Stephen's face twisted with regret, and for a moment, it seemed like he was on the verge of breaking. "I didn't mean for it to be this way. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know how to deal with you when things started changing." Adeline's heartache was evident in her face, but she didn't speak. She just watched him, her silence heavy with all the years of disappointment and abandonment. Hope could see the change in Stephen. Something was shifting in him. The man who had once been so distant, so detached, was now standing in front of her mother with an openness that surprised Hope. He was acknowledging what had happened. For the first time, he was seeing his mother as a person, not a problem to be dealt with, but as someone worthy of love. "I was wrong," Stephen said again, his voice a little stronger now. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to try. I want to make things right, even if it's too late." Adeline remained silent for a long time, her gaze unwavering. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just an immense sadness. But as Hope looked at her, she could sense that something had shifted in her mother's heart. A decision was coming. Then, in a moment that caught everyone off guard, Adeline stood up slowly. There was no doubt in her movements. This was her choice. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of everything she had been through. "I don't think you understand, Stephen," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The hardest part of all of this is that I don't know if I can forgive you. Not because of the past, but because of what's happening now. You don't just get to fix this with words. I've spent my whole life caring for you, for all of you, but in the end, I was the one who was forgotten." Hope's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment that would change everything. Adeline took a deep breath, her shoulders tense with emotion, and then she turned her eyes toward Hope. "I know you don't understand, Stephen," Adeline continued, her voice soft but final, "but Hope has given me something none of you ever did. She has given me love, real love, and now I have to choose what is best for me." Hope's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. She felt it, deep inside. "I'm not going back," Adeline said firmly, her voice stronger now. "I won't go back to a place where I'm treated like a burden. I won't go back to being invisible. You wanted me to disappear. But here, with Hope, I found something I thought was lost forever. My place in this world." The words hit like a thunderclap. And for a moment, Stephen, Edward, and Patricia stood frozen, as though they hadn't truly processed what Adeline was saying. Adeline turned to Hope, her eyes full of gratitude, sorrow, and something else. Peace. "You are my family now, Hope. You've shown me more love and respect than anyone else ever has. I choose you. I choose the love I found here." In the end, the greatest betrayal wasn't from her children. It was the choice she had to make for her own happiness. And that decision would change everything. What will Stephen and the others do now? Can they accept that Adeline has chosen Hope over them? Will they fight to take her back? Or will they finally accept that they've lost her? The consequences of Adeline's choice will have ripple effects far beyond this moment. Stay tuned to see how the story unfolds. The small cabin at the edge of Blackwood Creek had never felt more like home. The flickering light of the hearth cast gentle shadows across the wooden walls, and the warmth of the fire wrapped around them like a blanket, pushing back the cold. Outside, the forest whispered in the wind, but inside, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic hum of life beginning again. Adeline sat in her chair by the window, the light of the setting sun painting her features in a soft golden hue. Her once troubled heart now had a quiet peace she had never known before. The weight of years of abandonment, of being cast aside like old furniture, had lifted. She no longer felt invisible. Hope entered the room, carrying a tray with tea and freshly baked bread, her face full of determination and purpose. The transformation in her was just as evident as the one in Adeline. The little girl who had once been lost in her own loneliness was now someone with a mission to ensure that no one, especially Adeline, would ever feel forgotten again. "Here you go, Grandma," Hope said, setting the tray down on the table next to Adeline. Adeline smiled, her eyes warm with affection. "Thank you, my dear. You've changed my world, you know that?" Hope sat down beside her, her gaze meeting Adeline's. "You've changed mine too. I didn't know what family was until I found you." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. It was in these quiet moments that the heart of their story resonated most deeply. They were family now, not because they shared blood, but because they chose each other. In a world where family was often seen as something you were born into, they had forged their own path, one built on respect, love, and care. Adeline had taught Hope more than she realized. Over the past weeks, Hope had grown not just emotionally, but intellectually as well. Adeline's wisdom had seeped into her life in ways she never expected. From learning about life's deeper meanings to understanding the value of patience and kindness, Hope had become a stronger, more thoughtful young girl. Adeline had shared stories from her youth, teaching Hope about the importance of dignity, even in old age. "It's not about how much time you have, Hope. It's about how you spend it. Every moment counts if you live with purpose," Adeline would say, her voice steady, her eyes filled with a calm wisdom that only comes with a lifetime of living. Hope had taken those words to heart. She now saw the world through a new lens. Every act of kindness, every small gesture of love, was part of the grand design of life. She understood now that love wasn't just something you received. It was something you gave every day, in ways both big and small. Hope's transformation wasn't just about growing emotionally. It was also about growing into the woman she was destined to be. She was no longer the lonely girl waiting for her parents to come back. She was a young girl with a purpose, determined to make sure no one, especially Adeline, would ever feel abandoned again. The two of them, Adeline and Hope, had created something unique in this small town. A bond that no legal document could sever, no family member could destroy. Their bond was not bound by the fragile threads of blood, but by the stronger, more enduring ties of chosen love. As the evening wore on, the three of them, Adeline, Hope, and Matilda, sat around the dinner table, the soft glow of candlelight dancing across their faces. Walter had just returned from his workshop, where he'd spent the afternoon carving a small piece of wood into a simple, but beautiful, rocking chair, a gift for Adeline. "Not much in the world is as important as having someone who cares about you," Matilda said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet but full of understanding. "Blood doesn't make a family. It's the love you share, the respect you give each other." Hope looked up at Adeline, her eyes shining. "I've learned that now. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who you choose to love." Adeline smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. "And who chooses you, my dear?" The simple truth was now clear to them all. The world might have failed Adeline, but in Hope, she had found something more powerful than any family connection. She had found the love that comes from someone who chooses to care, who chooses to share their heart despite the odds. This wasn't just a story of an elderly woman being abandoned by her children. It was a story of a girl finding a new grandmother, of two souls that had once been lost, now finding their way to each other. And in doing so, they had discovered the most important truth of all. True family doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be real. Adeline's new family wasn't perfect, but it was real. In the end, love doesn't come from what you're born into. It's found in the people you choose to care for. As the story comes to a close, we are left with one lingering question. What would you do if your family saw you as a burden? Would you walk away to find someone who truly loves you? The answer, it seems, is to seek out the ones who truly care, who see you not as a burden, but as someone worth loving. And sometimes, when you make that choice, the family you create is the one that matters most.